So, in this moment, attention relaxes and the presence of being is recognized to be here. The presence of being that is everywhere, open and unbounded. The habit of the attention is to identify with the thoughts that are coming and going. The only way to come to freedom is to not identify and follow the habituated patterning, to recognize the being that is here, the unbounded silent presence that is here always. And in the recognition of this silent presence, it is to rest here as the aware presence, aware of the moving, changing landscape of mind consciousness, but not identifying with. Have you noticed that mind consciousness just runs like an engine that never takes a break? That the conversation of the mind with the mind, the multi-faceted conversation, is just a constant? That you cannot turn it off? And yet, it is possible to see more clearly than being held captive by the mind, being a victim to the mind, and allowing mind to be the master. Freedom from mind and the constant conversation that the mind is having with itself, believing itself to be someone, and the constant chatter, the need to keep that engine running, the engine of self-importance, right? The mind, the me, needs to keep the conversation going. Because have you noticed too that in deep sleep there is no mind, no story, no me? The only time that conversation stops is in deep sleep. Even in the dream state, it's still running. The sense of being the me, being the victim to this, is the great misunderstanding. And it is in coming to recognize the still, silent presence of being that we open to what is the true nature. We open to being the silent being and not being the character and the story, and not being constantly tossed around, tumbled around in that ongoing conversation that the mind is having with itself, in a desperate bid to find itself right and justify itself, and to find a way to make itself feel okay about itself constantly. A lifetime of constant conversation, constant justification, constant searching, seeking to find a way to make me feel good enough. When in truth, It's all a great misunderstanding. And the truth is that there is no one that is separate from the whole. There is no one that needs to prove themselves lovable, worthy of God, worthy of freedom, because that is not who you are in truth. Who you are in truth is before all identity, all sense of identification, all story, all ideas, all beliefs. Who you are in truth is before everything. Before the engine started running. And so it is to zoom out, to be the presence of being that can see what is really going on. There is no freedom in the mind. Whatever tactics the mind imagines that it can employ to find some sense of peace and freedom, it will always be a losing game. It will always end in a deeper story of unworthiness. What a great way to confirm the unworthiness, to keep failing at finding freedom, at finding peace, failing at finding love, failing at finding everything that is longed for in the play of the world. It's a losing game. It's a game that can never ever be won. And yet the mind, the me, imagines that this time it will maybe be victorious. But it's a losing game. End of story. It's a losing game. And it is a game that will play out through lifetime after lifetime until we come to recognize the truth of who we are and free ourselves from the cycle of birth and death, cause and effect, the obscurations of karma. The only way to come to this freedom is through the recognition that you are not the person, the story, the drama, that you are not the world that you have created in the mind's consciousness, that you are not that you are freedom itself, that you are a wholeness, a light, you are the love, the joy, the glory, everything that is longed for. You already are all of that. And the recognition is right here now in the deep, silent peace of being. Freedom from mind can only come through watching the mind, watching the thinking happening, in order to recognize that if you are aware of thinking, if you are aware of story, if you are aware of that engine that is constantly running, then what are you that is aware? What are you? How do you know the awareness if you are not the awareness? You are aware of the character, aware of the constant story. And as the awareness, you are not defined or limited by the story. So it is true that there is grace involved in this unfolding. And the grace is, let's say, divine timing. It is an alignment with grace, an alignment with that which has the power to grant this freedom. What is that? It is what you are. But until there is a surrender into that, it cannot be granted. It can only be granted in a deep intimacy, a deep surrender into not knowing, a deep surrender into, we could say, everything that is feared, a deep surrender into something that the mind cannot understand and bring into its storyline. That it is the momentary, spontaneous surrender into the unknown, into God, into love, into the glory, into the oneness. And it's a surrender that you cannot create with the mind. The surrender is a flow of grace which can only come about in divine timing when there is an absolute readiness in the consciousness to surrender deeply enough out of its patterning into a depth of silent peace where all of the thought waves absolutely stop. And in the absolute stop, the remembering in pure awareness of true essence nature. So everything is conspiring, inviting, calling for this possibility, this depth of surrender, this depth of relaxation. And yet it cannot be controlled. It cannot be done. And of course, that can be frustrating to the mind that's in a narrative and has a timeline and wants, right? But of course, this cannot be, this freedom, this remembering, it cannot be part of that narrative. How can it be? How could it be part of the narrative that is limited? It cannot be. It has to be already free from the limited narrative. It has to already be free from the story, from world, from the external appearance. It has to already be free. There has to be the recognition deep in a rooted, conscious knowing that freedom is not in the story. Freedom is not in ideas and beliefs. Freedom is not even in teachings. Freedom is before everything. So as these words come, they are not offering anything to the mind, although the mind will listen and incorporate them into the narrative, because that's what it does. But deeper than that, there is a listening happening, an open, receptive receiving of the resonant flow of grace. And the resonant flow of grace is where the consciousness that can subtly perceive itself can receive itself and open deeper to the remembering of true essence nature. It's all in the resonance. It's all in the deep, silent presence that is alive in the knowing of itself. So the invitation to be here still, recognize the presence, recognize the felt sense of being. And even if this has been recognized in awakening openings, there is still deeper to go if the mind is still running. As long as the mind is running, as long as the mind is taken notice of, there is still some sense of victimhood and separation playing. And the invitation of this is to fully see through and realize the oneness. So yes, there can be spontaneous openings. And of course, spontaneous openings to true nature that bring clear seeing that you are not the separate one, that you are not the person, seeing clearly that you are the silent being. And yet, if the mind is still running, there is still more to unfold. And this is the process of refinement into the remembering of unity, into the remembering of God, of love, of divine wholeness. And we do not want to rest as long as the mind is running and still has any sense of story of me. Now, this refinement process is a refinement that invites, through the grace, the flow of life, the possibility of releasing and seeing through all of the conditionings, all of the protections, and all of the karmic obscurations in that. It is possible to know and recognize the true nature without clearing the field. But the knowing of true nature while the mind is still running is not complete freedom. A partial truth is not the whole truth. Truth is truth is truth, and it is plain and simple, and it is shining, shining. So the great glory, invitation of life is that it is a flow of grace that allows this refinement to happen. It allows the meeting of all the conditionings and protections in order to see through the constant narrative and not be a victim to it, not be held captive to this. What is required is possibly what is more scary than anything to the mind, and that is to actually meet yourself, all of yourself, all the way through. And what does that entail? It entails feeling. It entails feeling the things that the me is afraid to feel. It is about meeting parts of yourself that the me is afraid to meet. It is about meeting yourself in utter openness, in utter presence and utter love, as the open being, the open field that is the simple being. It is about meeting every single fiber of the sense of what you are in order to see through. And this requires feeling. So the sense of being is a felt sense, but the subtle perception is a felt sense that is much finer. It's a fine feeling. It's a fine resonance, a fine frequency. So we can open to recognizing this, but still be pulled by the dense frequencies of mind consciousness until we really illuminate and allow the dense frequencies of mind consciousness to collapse into the purity of true nature. This collapse happens through the meeting and the feeling the feelings, the courage to feel. To not need to escape to a sense of transcendent, but to feel and recognize the oneness of absolutely everything all the way through. And this is what shifts the perspective. It shifts the perspective from a sense of being a me, being identified with any single part of the story, to knowing the oneness of being, that the oneness is one, is whole, is free, and that you are that. You are that here now. And yet the layers of mind that are still running can keep pulling the attention and pulling the attention. So we can come to a place of great freedom where there can be a seeing of the mind, watching of the mind, knowing that that is not who you are, and yet still being hooked in at times by the story, by the sense of the character. Because this is when there is not a full, true, unified knowing. And this true unified knowing uses life, it uses the play of life to unify the remembering, to really bring the remembering all the way through absolutely everything, so that the whole field of consciousness knows itself before consciousness. The whole field of consciousness knows its purity, its shining light, its true essence nature before consciousness. It brings itself naturally, it untangles itself and brings itself naturally to its essence nature, which is divinity, which is God, the glory, the mother. Brahman, we could call it. So we're speaking of this presence here now, this simple presence of being yourself, and the power of being yourself, the power of simply being here. As we start to recognize the essence nature, the essence nature is silence. The essence nature is stillness. The essence nature is the unmoving, unchanging, wide open field that is free, unlimited, unbounded. And so to recognize the stillness, the silence, the simplicity of being. And it is in resting here in the knowing, however deep this knowing is, the knowing that you are not the person, you are not the character, the knowing of what you are in truth as the unbounded field that is ever present and ever free, where you can feel the resonance of this truth, where you feel the aliveness of this knowing. It is to be here. Be nourished by the recognition. Be nourished by the knowing. And here, what you are is the awareness, the awareness that is aware of the moving, changing. And it is to watch the moving, changing, watch the thoughts that come and go, but not be fooled by the thoughts, not be entangled and identified. And if identification happens, it means that there's a tangled, discordant pattern that is ready to be released. So to release the tangle, it requires to meet the energy that is arising in the tangle, to feel the stress, to be fully present and open with whatever is arising. So as these words come, it is not someone speaking to someone else. They are speaking to the laws of nature. And the laws of nature are taking this divine opportunity to free themselves. So they bring forward the energy. They bring forward the stresses so that the stress can be released, so that the tangle can be released. So as we speak, what is being spoken is what is happening in the field. So the opportunity to untangle, the opportunity to let go of identification, let go of the holding patterns, and to feel and to meet as the openness of the wide open field that is ever open to whatever is moving through. Welcoming, receiving, never pushing anything away. Every single thing is part of the wholeness, and it is the ability to meet, be present with whatever is alive in the field. So we create the world out of the mind. So to be present with your inner world is to be present with your own creation. This is where the magic happens. This is where the clearing, the clear vision comes in. This is where the transmutation happens, is in the inner world. Meeting where identification happens, meeting where a trigger or a charge, reaction happens, and the willingness to feel instead of projecting. That any identification is identification with mind. It is to not identify with anything. You are none of the ideas that you have of yourself. You are not male or female or a neutral gender. You are before all of that. You are not attached to a country of origin of birth. You are not attached to family relationships. You're not attached to anything. You're before everything. You are not your name and your story or the roles that you play. All of that is mind consciousness creating a world. And that world is an inner world. Have you noticed that everyone has a different inner world? Every being sees things differently. If we try to find a way of making others see the way that we see, we are wasting our time, completely wasting our time. That is what so much of the wasted human life time is spent upon, trying to fit in, trying to justify, trying to be right, trying to be seen, trying to be heard, trying to be loved, trying to find a way to make your inner world be seen and appreciated by another. It's a waste of time, because every being is creating their own inner world. And freedom is freedom from that story. Freedom is freedom from the me, from the inner world, where you're not trapped or held captive by what you're afraid of. You're not held captive by the fears of not being enough, of not being seen or loved or justified or successful in worldly terms. All of that is a complete trap. A lot of minds like to speak about conspiracy theories and project those conspiracies out into the world. But the only conspiracy is your mind with your mind's story. The only conspiracy is what you believe to be true, and the attention that is given to that, and the attention and the distraction that happens in trying to have your way of seeing be right. It's all a waste of time. It's all a total waste of time. The being that just is doesn't need to be seen. It doesn't need anything. So this is where we speak of being invisible, coming to be no one, nothing, to be invisible, where we're not reacting and needing to put our opinions forward and be heard. We're not needing to be a loudspeaker for our inner world, trying to be heard. That we just let go, and we actually recognize deep in our own consciousness what we are truly here for. That we're not here for that. That we're here to be free of the world, curiously and counterintuitively to the mind's ideas. We're here to be free of all of that, that we're not held captive by the mind's ideas and its desperate scrambling to hold on to something, anything. That we're here to know that what we are is love, that what we are is one with God, what we are is one with divine wholeness. This is the true essence nature. And when we come to know the oneness in true perspective, in clear perspective, the knowing, it brings a knowing that shifts the perspective of seeing. So the perspective of seeing changes to being someone seeing a world, to being God knowing God. Right? It's not a sense of, oh, I've had an awakening and I know God consciousness and I know what God is. No, 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 that all has to go. All of that has to collapse. There has to be a complete, humble collapsing of anyone that has had any kind of experience. All experience has to go. It has to be given over to God. It has to be humbly given back to where it has arisen from. There cannot be someone that knows this, not in the way of holding on, not in the way where ego is holding some kind of ideas. Everything has to go. Everything has to collapse in, essentially collapse into the bliss, the pure light, bliss light of divine wholeness. Anything that pulls the attention, anything that is believed, any areas of holding on, they will be challenged. And when there is a readiness, let it go. Let it go and know God. Let it go and know what you are longing to know yourself as. So there are ever deeper layers, let's say, of surrender, of releasing. And yet the wholeness is one whole. Everything is, of course, included in the wholeness. Now, as these words come, the mind will never believe what is being spoken, because the mind is programmed to hold on, to want to know, to think it knows. And it's therefore programmed to try to co-opt any kind of opening experience and take hold of it. To be invisible, to not need to be sharing your point of view, not needing to be seen and heard, not needing to be evangelical in your understanding or what you hold as precious and true, not being attached to any flavor of teaching, to know that there's only one. And until that oneness is known all the way through, everything has to keep being surrendered into the pot, right? All flavors, everything, all desires, everything. And how is it surrendered? It's surrendered by illuminating, just illuminating and illuminating and illuminating as the aware light, as the light of awareness, illuminating it all until you are invisible. And then what are you? What are you is life itself. You are the glory shining. You are love. You are beauty. You are perfection. But you are not referencing yourself. You're not sitting there saying, I am beauty, I am God, I am perfection. You're not saying anything because you don't need to say anything anymore. You are silent and you are free and you are whole and you are love and you are one with God. What you can be sure of is the fullness is full enough to fill you up. Your cup is full. Your cup is running over. Runneth over, doth your cup. Just to feel the resonance of a cup running over, brimming with blissful knowing of the one that you are. Any sense of the knowing of this oneness is where the nourishment happens. The knowing is the flow, and the flow nourishes itself by flowing in the knowing of itself. It flows as life. It flows as life eternal, life that can never be ended. And you are this life. You are eternal life. You are the one eternal life. You are animating everything. You are the light that creates the appearance of creation. So none of what is being spoken can be understood by the mind. And there is grace to that, because what the mind cannot understand brings us to a stillness where there is a recognition, where there's presence and resonant recognition. The recognition is a subtle perception, which is a frequency, a fine feeling. And this is consciousness consciously awake to itself, where consciousness is consciously awake and knowing itself. There is an aliveness, an aliveness in the presence of being, an aliveness that is the conscious recognition of yourself. So the longing plays a profound part too. The longing for freedom, for God, for this truth, the pull. It's a magnetic, energetic. It's consciousness being pulled into itself. Essentially, it's the alive flow, and the alive flow is flowing in itself to know itself. And the longing is the evidence of that flow. So we first feel it as a longing, a yearning, as an ache. And when we can just feel the longing, what are you longing for? Whatever your mind tells you that you are longing for, it is always God. It is always your own self. It is always wholeness, happiness, love, truth, awakening, enlightenment, whatever words we give to that, freedom. It is always a longing for the remembering of union, the remembering. And so to open to the longing and to let that ache, the first sense of feeling is to feel the ache of separation, the ache, the longing, the pain that we're trying to fill with things and people and relationships and food and stuff and experiences, right? We're trying to fill that space. But ache to the bottom of the ache for yourself. Be willing to face yourself and feel yourself. So many tears spilled for what we cannot have and what we imagine we are not and what has been lost. But how many tears do we spill for God, to know ourselves? How many tears do we spill in the willingness to feel the ache? Please, please, come and get me. Come and get me. Come and save me from this human planet. Why did you drop me off here? How willing are we to feel that ache, that pull, that longing? In some ways, we can be so protected because there is so much pain around it. And that pain is separation. That pain is the core, deep sense of separation, where we lost our trust in wholeness. We lost our trust in God, in the divine. And we are not willing to really let go into that again. And yet we are so deeply longing for that. How willing are we to feel the pain of what we have lost? And what we have lost is the knowing of our connection to oneness, to God. How willing are we to open up, to feel, to long, and to surrender into that longing, that yearning, that ache, that pull? It is this that is such a part of this unfolding, is to open to and not try to fill that space with more things, but to really open, to really feel. as we open to feeling more. What are we willing to feel in order to be free? What are we willing to feel in order to set ourselves free? To set our families free, to set our loved ones free? What are we willing to feel in order to end the cycles of karma? The courage to feel so as not to project it on. The courage to free ourselves from our own karmas so we do not keep passing on. Are we willing to feel our own pain when we see it projected in the beings around us? Are we willing to feel that? Feel it all the way through. To feel it as the open field of being, without the narrative, without the drama, without the story, without the guilt and the shame, which can be such a huge part of the me's strategy to keep itself separate. Are we willing to feel the energy signature of the guilt and the shame of the ways that we imagine that we have failed in the human game, the ways that we have done wrong, the ways that we have let people down? Are we willing to feel without the story, without the narrative? Are we willing to meet what holds us captive? It might seem like, isn't all of that irrelevant? Isn't this about just being the light? Yes, it is. Absolutely. It's about being the light, the love, and you are that. But what is keeping you from that is all of that junk that is being kept in the back of the cupboards, right? That there's an unwillingness to let go, to clean out all the cupboards, to clean out under the stairs, right? To clean it all out. You don't have to go digging around and excavating. It's not about therapy. It's not about story. It's not about narrative. It's a willingness to actually open the cupboard up that life is bringing forward, to face what we're afraid to face. Because what we are afraid to face is our own story, our own mind's creation. If we cannot face our own mind's creation, we will be held captive by our mind's creation. And yet we have this power to collapse it as patterns of consciousness into pure consciousness. By knowing the conscious being that we are, we have this incredible power to not be trapped or held captive by it, but to free it. So let's open up all of the cupboards, all the doors, all the windows, right? Let's get under the bed, right? Under the sofa. Let's open up everything. What are you holding on to? What are you keeping just in case? What, just in case God really turns up and says, you are the light? I'm going to say, oh, you know what? Under the bed, I've got this story that I'm not worthy because I did something bad when I was a teenager that I cannot forgive myself for, right? No, do not be pulled back. Do not be held captive by your inner narrative, by the stories. Watch it and let it free you. Let the story free you by not listening and believing it, but by opening up to the energetic signatures, feeling the feelings, and freeing the discordant patterns of consciousness that will keep cycling around as karmic obscuration until they are shown the light of their own nature. So, what is our service? Our service is to be the light. Show those dark places the light that you are. Beam the light that you are. Radiate the love that you are. And allow every single fiber, atom of your being to come home to this remembering that everything already belongs, but it has to know its belonging through your perception. And if what you're perceiving is the stories of your mind and the narrative and believing it, then these places that are already free and whole and perfect, they are already the glory. They are already God. If they don't know that through your knowing, they will hold themselves captive into another rebirth. So let us make the most of this seeming human birth and free these places into true nature, into the glory. This is the true possibility of a human birth. This is the evolution of consciousness that we are part of. We are so fully part of it. So let's take part. Let's take our part and see through the inner narrative and let the knowing of God be consciously known in our own clear perspective of seeing and subtle perception, so that we are a radiant point of divine wholeness, so that divine wholeness and the light that can never be dimmed and the love that is the blissful, radiant fullness can shine at every point. Let us take responsibility for being such a point, such a possibility. Let us take full responsibility. To let go, to face ourselves. All of the places that get revealed. It goes on and on, this process. It's profound, ever humbling. Let us not arrive anywhere. Let us keep opening and opening and opening and opening and opening, receiving and receiving, transmuting, and allowing the flow of grace that is true humility, true light, to just keep flowing in its oneness, in its wholeness, knowing itself radiantly in the self-sustaining way that she already knows herself. She is hiding in everything, and she is moving to reveal herself. So let her be revealed. Let her be fully revealed. So this is what we're speaking of, right? It's profound, it's beautiful, it's sublime, it's wholeness, it's divine wholeness, and it's who you are. It's the truth of who you are, shining bright now. Do we have free will? Do we have the possibility of making a choice? Not really. And yet, where we feel like we have a choice, we are invited to use that choice, to choose God, to choose love, to surrender, to keep a one-pointed focus. This is where we're not choosing in truth, of course, but the sense of choosing that we have has been given so that we can show, reveal our readiness in consciousness itself, because it's all one consciousness. And our sense of choosing is a revealing of where our consciousness is and what it's ready for. So it's not someone choosing God. It's not someone choosing to be in satsang. It's not someone choosing. The choosing is the readiness of consciousness to know itself. Because when consciousness is ready and mature, ready to know itself, it chooses itself. It sees itself. And in a way, that choice is really the start of a deeper awakening, because it's that consciousness is already consciously choosing itself. And it looks on the surface of life like someone choosing to be in satsang, someone choosing to remain vigilant. But it's consciousness, it's the flow of consciousness revealing where it is to itself. And it's the grace of a deeper awakening already happening in consciousness. It's like an evolutionary illuminated choice, we could say, that's happening naturally in the whole field. And when that consciousness that's never been divided or separate, when it chooses itself, it's choosing freedom, it's aligning. And as it aligns, it creates a finer resonance of remembering. And then the field of consciousness starts to collaborate. More of the field starts to collaborate to bring in what is needed for that choice to be supported. So that choice is a surrender into the wholeness. And then what we choose to collaborate with, that collaboration brings the collaboration of consciousness with itself. So it's a living proof, let's say, that when we choose God and we take, let's say, what appears to be one step towards God or the mother, she'll take 10 towards you, right? When you invite the light in, the light comes beaming in, but it has to be wholehearted. It has to be full. It can't be a me that's like, well, yeah, I really want that. But you've got these closets full of junk. It's got to be a wholehearted, right? You can't fool divine wholeness. You can't be like, yeah, I'm in. Just hope she doesn't notice that I've got cupboards full of junk. It doesn't work like that. She knows because she's in there. She's in your cupboard waiting to pop out and be seen, right? She's all of it. She knows what's going on. So you can't fool her with false surrenders, with big declarations of the mind. Oh, yes, I'm so devoted and I'm fully in. No. It doesn't work like that. It's about the heart and the longing and the pull and the excruciating squeeze that cries out for divine knowing, right? This is why we have to feel the longing, the ache, the pull. This is what she responds to. Wholehearted, whole self in, utter, devoted. The yes, the big yes. She's playful. She's loving, she's kind, she's patient, compassionate. She knows you better than you know yourself, because what you know yourself to be is not what you are. You are not the tall one, the small one, the big one. You're not the Canadian one, right? You're not the, let's see, the British one, the Russian one. You're not this one or that one. You're not the American one. You're not any of that. You're none of that. You're not male. You're not female. You're not open, you're not closed. You're not dark, you're not blonde, you're not balding, you're not any of that. You're before everything. You're before everything. And what you are in truth is whole and pure and bright. And everything is conspiring for this to be known. At the point that you imagine that you are as someone, there is a conspiracy for the point to free itself into the infinite knowing and to shine at the point with that divine infinite knowing. So let us open the field. What are you noticing? What is alive? What are you curious about? Can you feel the resonance of truth? Can you feel the aliveness of who you are? What are you ready to let go of? What are you ready to meet? Who are you in truth? Are you ready? Are you willing to know yourself all the way through? That invites to not deny any single part of yourself. We're not creating moods of loving yourself. We're meeting the feelings of hating yourself, right? In order to know that underneath that story of self-loathing and unlovableness, that you are love itself. We're not creating sentimental narratives or spiritual ideas. We're getting right down and dirty in the grittiness of what it takes to really be free, to really come home to yourself. This is the invitation of the great Siddhas. This is the invitation of perfection itself, is to get really into all of yourself so that you know the wholeness of yourself all the way through. This is the surrendered life. It is to perpetually be life surrendering to itself and never arriving anywhere as someone. Cannot even imagine how deep we can go. But we're going.